once again to Washington and Me. I'm your host, George Blaze, as we're continuing trying to see what's going on with every industry that's suffering from this COVID-19 crisis. Of course, the hospitality industry, we're talking restaurants, bars, hotels. This is one of the major areas that has been impacted most in a lot of ways because everyone's locked down. Everyone has to stay home. We're trying to social distance. How are we supporting this industry? How are small businesses keeping going? What are we looking forward to in the future to create systems that keep all of this going? Joining me now is the CEO of the Washington Hospitality Association, one of the largest membership organizations that supports this complete industry here in the state. Anthony Anton, good to see you, sir.
George, thanks so much for having me on and help us get the word about what's going on in hospitality and with our economy and our community. I really appreciate it.
Well, I have to ask you, Anthony, when is the last time, describe to me the last time you were able to sit with a group of friends and family in close quarters at a decent restaurant and have a decent meal? And what did you guys have?
Oh, great question. So I'm going to say inside because we can't eat outside currently right now. And I'd encourage everyone to still meet your friends and do that. Oh, I would say the moment before it hit, I believe we did a birthday party, a glass of wine with some friends at one of the great restaurants on Pacific Avenue there in Tacoma, which has really got a great scene. It might have been another one of the, no, there was a time after that where we did Don Rustin Way. So a couple of the great restaurant scene areas in the Tacoma area.
It's really one of the things that hits me most when I have time to just sit back and quietly think about where we're at, what I'm going to be covering, what we're going to be talking about here. Is just like these little things that we take for granted a lot about what brings vitality to a city or to a region. The restaurants, the bars, the venues, the cabaret licenses, all of these things now. Without organizations like yours out there advocating, particularly on the government level, standing up and saying, hey, I know that everybody wants to do what's prudent for, I don't know, to make sure that they score points politically in what's going on here. But we have to think about the fact that these are business owners. These are the vitality of communities. These are vitality of our cities. And we can't forget that just shutting down is not the easiest decision to make.
George, I completely agree with you. I think one of the things we've really seen is as our society has gotten busier and busier, we've leaned on hospitality more and more for our sense of community. It's more and more where we've had our birthday parties, a glass of wine with friends that we've missed, getting away to our favorite vacation spot that we view as more of our second home, whether it's out on the coast or over at Lake Chelan or over in Walla Walla. I mean, hospitality is really a part of the enjoyment of life. And I think that's why we love it so much. And I think that's why it's been heartbreaking to not be able to service our members in this time, our neighbors in this time, to be able to help people through. And we really just can't wait to get back to it. And while people think of their neighborhood winery as or neighborhood diner or B&B as just an individual business, the reality is collectively they employ right around 300,000 people, or did before the virus broke out. We're the state's #1 largest private employer. It's just a collection of a bunch of small businesses that added up to a great number. And so when the governor put out their report of the most impacted industries via the Boston Consulting Group last month, hospitality had lost 152,000 jobs in May. Compare that to the Great Recession, which was a horrific time. At the worst point of the Great Recession, we'd lost 15,000 jobs. So we're tenfold the impact. And the margins are small. At least during the Great Recession, we could keep the doors open so we could try to cover fixed costs. During this time, we've been incurring fixed costs with no revenue. And so when you have 16% fixed costs and a 4% margin, you've got to be open for several months just to pay the bills off from the 1 month you were closed. So the challenge is like none other. The support that our industry needs from the community is like none other. I'm reminded of a time I went into a little teriyaki shop, mom and pop, I would say almost nondescript, and she was going through a lot of the requests for community donations that people had made for her, for Boy Scouts and PTA and other things. And she was a little place, and she was reading every one of them, figuring out how she could help them. And now I almost feel like, it's the time has come around where now it's our turn to ask, and now it's our time. We need that help because she's going to need that to get through.
I think that's one aspect of the business that a lot of people may not actually be aware of, that many of our restaurateurs, our chefs, our tavern and bar owners, they're working on a margin that it's really because of their love for the industry, their love for food, their love for bars, that they stay open. And in a place where you say the margins are so thin, CARES Act and PPP had a certain impact, but I wonder if you could speak to a little bit of, like, we've gone through a round of the PPP, it helped some people, the CARES Act is supporting in some ways. What more is needed at this point? Where do we need to move forward? I think things are in a logjam in Congress.
Well, let's talk about one thing at a time. I think that you're absolutely right. Most people don't realize that if a 4% margin is just not that much money. I think we actually did a focus group a couple of years ago where we said, hey, if you spend $100 in a restaurant, what do you think the owner takes home? And the average answer was around $35 or $40 profit. Well, the answer is 4. That's a 4% margin. So on $1 million restaurant, which is exactly the average in Washington State before COVID, the average owner was making a $40,000 income. That's not a private jet, luxury car style income. It's an income of love, and we're not whining about that. We love what we do. We love servicing. We love putting our heart in to making you feel like you have a second home, to making you feel like you have a sense of community. And on the chef side, to really, I'm putting my heart on my plate, and I'm hoping that it provides you joy. And that's the piece that keeps people in the industry, because it's not the money.
And we're just talking about the owners here. In my previous life as a musician, I spent a lot of time in the peripheries of the industry. It's a whole nother shift of life. Like, life begins at 2 a.m. and ends at 5 a.m. for their personal lives. Sitting there with barkeeps, splitting tips at night, at the end of the night of a bar, and knowing that that's all they're gonna get. What happens to these people?
Well, that's been one of our biggest focuses is how do we make sure the unemployment insurance system will support our team. We were really happy with the early actions of government in the ability for people to work part-time and still collect unemployment. So if we could keep them employed a little bit and they can get a little bit of employment, it's not as much of a burden on the UI system, and we're still allowing them to have access to employment and other things. And I think a lot of people looked at us a little cross-eyed of, why are we fighting so hard for our team members to get unemployment? Well, it's because they're family. And these are people, we tend to spend more time spend more time with people at work than sometimes we do our friends, because we see them 8 hours every day, or 6 to 10, depending on your restaurant shift. And so we really wanted to take care of them to that system, and we really wanted to get them employed again. I think the biggest keys for this, George, one, we got to get this virus knocked down. And so masks are not political. We need to start wearing them, and we're doing a much, much better job. I think the reason in the last 10 days we've seen the virus numbers starting to tip and starting to go back down from the spike is because people are getting it. That, the tremendous amount of mass impact that masks had in Yakima can now make in the rest of the state to get us to start having the conversation to open again and not have to fear more closures. So I think the first thing is you can help save a teriyaki place or a winery or a B&B today by wearing a mask. And that's and the second thing then is, how do we get help with a lot of our fixed expenses and then get revenue jump started? And as we have time, George, I'd love to talk to you about it's going to be a complex plan, but there's elements of those I think I could easily talk through that are going to be key.
Well, please, yeah, enlighten us on what the plan is looking ahead.
Well, I think the first thing is we got to figure out how to help hospitality with debt. They were forced to close through no fault of their own, and yet most landlords still wanted to be paid. the fixed taxes still had to be, maybe they got delayed, but they didn't go away. They've just been building up into a bigger pile. And on a small margin, how do we pay those off? So I think we need to have an active conversation with the federal government about another round of PPP or some kind of restaurant relief, which I think there's several proposals in DC for. But those first couple of rounds, we're assuming that we're going to be out of this in 2 weeks and then 2 months. And now we're talking about maybe having to be in phase 3 through next spring as a very real area, which means if we want to help all these dreams of self-sustainability and other things move forward, we're going to need to help small business bridge this in a big way from the debt perspective. Then there's some instigators we can do, and those should be fun. George, we got an incredible state we live in, right? We can go see a rainforest. We can go see a Mount St. Helens and a volcano. We've got the best wine country, I would argue, kicks California's butt. We got some of the best wine country in the world to go travel with. We've got incredible lakes. We've got one of the most vibrant downtown scenes around in the city of Seattle. Who needs New York, Disneyland, and Vegas? We got Washington. So I think one of the things we can do is rally around each other. If it's not safe to travel state to state for another couple of years, and that's probably going to be the case, then take some great vacations here. And how do we really rally around each other to say, I've explored Washington and I've seen the different corners of our state. I hate that I'm the lead of the Hospitality Association, and my kids and I have never hiked up to see the Mount St. Helens area. And I hate the fact that I don't even know if we have some of the best river rafting in the world up in Snohomish County and Skagit County. People travel around the world to come here, but how many of us have gone 20 minutes up I-5 to just do a nice river raft down there and support that local community? So I think that's one of the instigators we can do to help people rally, as well as other things like make it easier to do business by extending the liquor sales. Right now we have the ability to do wine to go and beer to go and cocktails to go, but some people are hesitant to invest in them because when does the phase end? And then I've invested in doing it and then shutting it down again. So I think give us a little confidence so we can do better. If we need better sideboards, let's have that conversation, but let's extend that. And I think we have gotten some good interest in government from doing that. And then other elements that we can do that spur business. I think, how do we have a better partnership with third-party delivery systems? It's one thing when they are a small part of our world, but in a virus world, we're really dependent on them. They can charge 20, 25, 26, 27% of the restaurant bill back to us when we're only making 4%. And so there should be synergy here. We want those companies to succeed, but I'd love to see government bring us together and have a conversation about how third-party delivery could more effectively help. And then I also think we looked at banking differently during the Great Depression, when we thought a lot of people were going to lose their homes. How can we look at banking differently during this time and determine how we keep a lot of small businesses in their businesses, keep generating, keep providing hope to that American dream, and move forward from there?
It would seem to me like it's a no-brainer as far as in these negotiations with the banking industry, to understand that this is a cascading problem. It's not just the fact that restaurant owners aren't able to stay open or to make money, but there are restaurants who don't own the facilities that they live in. They don't own the building, they're leasing the building. If they can't pay their lease and nobody else is available to open a restaurant because nothing is open now, then that defaults. Then whoever owns that building is now going to have to default to someone else. This is a cascading issue. We have to stem the tide at the front door and not wait for it to become this bubble where they're just going to be selling off derivatives, and another mortgage crisis where we're selling off derivatives of all these closed restaurants, bars. I mean, even when we talk about shopping malls, this is part of the discussion as well. Across this country, all these strip malls and all these stores are closing up. Where you used to have these anchor stores like JCPenney and stuff across middle America that are out of business now. There's nothing holding them together. All of this property is out there vacant, and we're just waiting for this to hit the market. And I don't think anyone realizes that everywhere you go across this country, these closed, boarded up business fronts and strip malls that aren't doing anything, like a nail salon here and there, is not going to support the amount of real estate that's sitting out there.
A million percent agree. And I think that's what this solution, and it's got to be had as a community. I mean, the effect you talked about is what I'm trying to educate people on currently in government and other businesses is look, landlords, this is not 2017, where if one restaurant closed, 6 other people were excited to try their concept out and there was competition for space. And then that was our reality 3-4 years ago. We're looking at 20, 25, 30% of places closing up and going away, and not a lot of equity to come back in and reopen behind them. So landlords, the best thing you can do, so you have money coming in as a landlord, is to help us figure out how to stay open. And banks, the best thing you can do to make sure that all these payments keep getting made and you have liquidity and you have the ability to keep operating, is work with the landlords, because what they signed their original agreement to build the property out is not today's reality. And government might have to help us facilitate that conversation and be part of that solution as well.
Clearly, I mean, it should have been terrifying to people. If you look back a few years back, and maybe it's just because we pay attention to these things and the average person doesn't. But when I saw things like Bennigan's and Ruby Tuesdays and these kind of things that are anchors of suburban communities across this country go out of business and nothing really fill that space again, where do we go from here?
Well, I was these times are so interesting in that we just got to believe, because if we stop believing, game over. I absolutely believe in the future, and yet we got to figure out the present, and the present has got some real serious changes. For hospitality, the future pre-COVID was incredibly bright, and I still believe it will be, and it is today, and that's generational. For as much as people like me and Gen X and older generations want to complain about millennials, for hospitality, they're an incredible generation, because they're the first generation to really understand that I'd rather invest in experiences than an object. When I grew up, I wanted an Atari. It tells you how old I am. Or a bike. I wanted a thing. Millennials want to see a lake, go on a hike, go see the Trailblazers in Portland until the NBA comes back to Seattle. I mean, these are the things that my kids want to do. That's what they want to get for their stuff. And that means the future of it is phenomenal. And but it comes back to we have a time to get through to make that future happen. And how do we rally as a community so the light doesn't go out on that hope? And we got to believe we'll figure it out. I mean, we're the state that figured out how to make metal airplanes fly. We figured out how to sell coffee for $3. We figured out how to do our favorite shopping online. We can figure out how to do great hospitality and come out of this, but we got to have a commitment, a desire, a rallying cry to figure that out.
And a lot of that of the work you're doing as far as on the government affairs and has to be dictated to looking at things are never going to be the same again. Yeah. So a lot of the rules and regulations and zoning requirements and restrictions that we have on restaurants, as we call them, or how we describe them, that stuff has to go out the window. We have to find a new way to define what an eating establishment is. I know in many cities, in Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, you can go to these places where people's private houses, they have kind of really niche little restaurants it's 6 people, it's by reservation only, it's not expensive, but it is very niche in people's private houses. But it takes a lot of hoops and things to jump through as far as governmental zoning and restrictions and requirements and permitting. That's like, we need to get people in business again.
Well, and I think that's what we can do great, is innovate, but we actually have to have the freedom to do so. So I think if you look at old liquor laws that were established right after Prohibition, what does it look like today when we have pot shops and we have free-flowing economies and we have delivery systems and we have far better controls and tracking we ever had before? What could that look like today to both help control liquor in a way that we would want to as parents and community people and help innovate businesses? And we've seen, local distilleries. Let's not give up on those folks. They've done some really cool things. We've seen local wineries challenge international wine companies and win. And I think some of those things are absolutely there. I also think,
Anthony,
a new generation. Sorry, go ahead.
Anthony, since you brought that up, I don't want to run out of time here. You talking about the wine industry. Since I have you here, I have to ask you. Within the last 15, 20 years, there's been this whole thing where the Chinese have been dumping cheap imitation wines into the market that have really screwed the wine industry up in such a way that I think people are not aware of where we're at with that. Do you have any insight or any understanding of that?
George, I'd love to talk about that more another day. I'm aware of what you're talking about, but I would also say, in spite of that challenge, Washington wines have done well. And I've also, we have an intense pride on Washington wines. And so I do think it's a worthy conversation to keep talking about how do we compete fairly. We are in the Ag Central, right? We have incredible apples. We have incredible wine. I was just talking to the McDonald's operator of Othello, and he said, right up the road, we're making all the French fries for Japan, right? So we want to compete internationally. Washington's a great host to do that. How do we make sure that other people are competing fairly? I think is a great conversation. But I'll also say I'm going to get back to innovation. Our industries had to innovate. The old schools had to go away, and really the new schools had to embrace technology. And with that, I think we need to get more and more comfortable with the fact that it's okay to sit down and then pick up a menu on your phone, right? Scan the Q code, order your food. It can remember your allergies. It can remember your favorite items. It can do things that old school hospitality would say, but I want to be there talking to you. I want to smile. I want to make you feel warm. That's part of that innovation we're going to need, is to become more efficient in embracing technology and create a brand for what a Washington hospitality looks like. I think that's some of the areas we can really do better. And the other thing I really hope we do, you're talking about anchor clients, and those are important, but honestly, I would love to see more small business loans, more minority targeted loans, things to do to bring up. We've got some of the best minority ownership percentages of any industry out there in hospitality, and it's not good enough. And so I think as we have an opportunity to reset, how do we look at our different communities and say, where is that variety? Where is what we're looking for? I love the chain folks. I think they provide a ton of great things. This is not anti that conversation. It's more, this is an opportunity. The hospitality is the one place where you can still open up a mom and pop place and carve out a living and carve out a passion. Gas stations, not so much anymore. Large retail, not so much anymore. And yet here we still stand. And by up until this year, we were getting more and more diverse each year. And you were seeing, Korean ribs and pho and Ethiopian food and people's take on schnitzel, and all different places and food trucks. And I think we want to make sure that we provide more access in a reset to allow more people to pursue that dream.
Well, I only have about a minute here left with you. I know one of the things in looking into your organization, what you've been doing is the Washington Hospitality Association, even before the COVID thing, showed a lot of support for legislation to provide education in terms of human trafficking, particularly in the hotel industry and what have you. Just for a minute or so, can you speak to why that's important to you?
Yeah, this is our community. These are our sons and daughters. And we've been targeted by different groups to try to use hotel rooms. And we just want to say, not in our house. And we want to provide education so our front desk is aware of what's going on. So our police force knows that we're aware of tracking it. And we've been supporting different efforts in our communities because it's going to be holistic. One, for people who are in trouble, we want them to quickly have the ability to report, have access, have ways out, and have the community support we need. We want to make sure that our employees can spot it, because I think you'd get it right at 100% support to never have a hotel room used inappropriately again. And then the question is, how do we rally against it? And how do we build the community support? So we have loved our partnerships with different police forces. in over communicating. We've loved the training that we've done, and we want to do more of it. And really just highlight the fact that you'd like to think human trafficking was gone in 2020, that we're not talking about this kind of conversation, and yet it's still here. And the only way we're going to be able to get it gone is to put a spotlight on it and make sure that anyone who is even thinking about it knows it's not welcome here in Washington.
Well, Anthony, it's fantastic work that you're doing all around, including your monthly webinars. I got to catch some of that this afternoon. In fact, the amount of education that you provide to not only people in the industry, but people who are just interested in what's going on there. I mean, we keep changing guidelines as far as what's acceptable and not, and you educated people on what the guidelines are as well. We hope to get more cooperation and people to not fight about the masks and not to politicize the masks. It's one of the worst things I hate seeing on the internet is people freaking out about wearing a mask. Like, just wear a mask. I mean, come on, it's not a big deal. But I'm glad that you
come over to the table. 30 seconds. You can get to the door to the table. Just go like
you
that.
can handle it. You'll be okay. Like, I mean, there's a sign in the door that says no shoes, no socks, no service. Like, you can put a shirt on to come in here. I don't see how it's much different.
Well, we love our guests and we want to stay open. And the best thing they can do is help us get this virus down. And then let us get our businesses open. And George, I appreciate you so much having me on today, so we can inform more people about what's going on and how they can support their local hospitality businesses.
Absolutely. Anthony Anton, CEO of the Washington Hospitality Association. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And thank you all out there for watching. We'll see you next week right here on Washington and Me.